There we go.
Got it.
All right. Now for our 4:35 session on day 2, the Legend of Curly's Gold and Conclave 2022. We have His Excellency, the Most Reverend Bray Weaver, Auxiliary Bishop of the United States, with Taoism and the Tao of Gnosis, which is essentially just what I slapped in place of your title. So, but you know, it works. Here we have Taoism, Neidan, a different alchemy translated for the Western mind. So Bishop Jeremiah Bray Weaver has been a psychotherapist since 1997 and has taught hypnotherapy and counseling at a number of trade schools and colleges. He was raised in the shamanic Church of Seven Arrows before studying Tendai Mikyo Buddhism and finally finding a home within the Apostolic Johannite Church, where he serves at the parish of St. Mary Magdalene in Colorado. Bray brings a lifelong study of the mind and the subconscious, from soul retrieval to modern hypnosis and psychotherapy. And that's my puppy. So take it away, Excellency.
I really should change that. It makes me sound very woo-woo. So, but be that as it may.
You're hiding a quartz under that beard, aren't you?
Yeah, pretty much. So we're talking about Taoism and Nidan, which is kind of the internal Taoist alchemy. And one of the things that I can say here is that, this is where we're going to here. This is where my studies came from, is the Wudang Mountains. Now, Wudang is an interesting place there. It's kind of in opposition to the Shaolin that many more Westerners know a lot more about. But we can also say that Shaolin is mainly Buddhist, where the Wudang is mainly Taoist in nature. So it takes on an entirely different kind of connotation there. And we're talking about internal alchemy, and I mean to kind of link that to the Western tradition a little bit. And some of that will be a little bit contrived, some of that will be a little bit interesting, but it still gives us a flavor of what it is that we're looking for, where we can push this into a venue where we can start to understand it. And the reason that I'm doing it that way is that the Taoist texts are poetic, they're beautiful, they are absolutely fascinating, and they are relatively impenetrable to get to a meaning in terms of what does this actually mean for us? How do we actually work this? So my hope is that by linking it to things that we already know, we can take ideas that we have and we can elaborate on them. And to be honest, there's quite a bit of overlap there too. So you will beg my pardon for some of the liberties that I take with things. So I want to start this with the Kantong Chi, which is it translates the seal of unity of the three, and it's one of the exclusively Nidan texts of Taoism. While there are many texts of Taoism and many that are kind of considered authoritative and many more that really aren't, the Kantong Chi is really the only one that really talks about Nidan specifically, and it breaks it into 3 parts, as you would imagine that there's 3 parts that are essentially equal in that. And it talks about the relationship of the cosmos to the Tao and explaining things according to the system of the Book of Changes, which is of course the Book of the I Ching, which we often think of as being a kind of divinatory system, if you will, but the meanings, and as we talk about that, will go quite a bit further than that. And the second one is the realized state of how they're translating Shengen as the saintly person. And I think that this is one of those things that they try to speak to the Western mind and miss it a little bit. So they talk about it as being the teachings of the Tao Te Ching, which is the book of the way and its virtue. But they speak about this as that taking on the entire Tao Te Ching, taking on the aspect of Wu Yi, which is one that we're meant to experience in like the martial science as that moment when the when the mind escapes the body and the body flows kind of on the wings of spirit, if you will. There's an absent-mindedness there, not like a I'm not thinking, but the thinking doesn't matter. There's something else. There's spirit moving with the will of the universe that's involved in Wu-Wei in a way that we don't think about. And I don't know that that connotation of the body and the actions and everything else moving, as you know, with this kind of spiritual direction, is inherently pervasive to the Western mind when we read things like saintly person or non-doing. I don't think that that comes across very well in the translation. So I want to kind of mark that out. But that's the second part of this. And the third part of it is an alchemical practice that leads to the realization of the Tao as a state of sainthood. And it's important that we talk about that in a way. But this particular lecture is mainly going to focus on this one, the relationship of the cosmos to the Tao. And that has to, and it really needs to be that way because it lays somewhat of a foundation for how it is that we view really everything else in that. So the first thing that we need to understand, and this picture here is what it's, if you look up Nidan and you know, in images, this is one that will come up. And this is a picture actually of the human body. And I don't know if you can see here. I'll see if I can't draw here a little bit. Nope, not gonna let me do it. But if you can see my pointer here, you can see that this here is the lower jiao. This here has to do with elimination and things of that nature. This is the middle jiao, and this is the upper jiao. But the Taoists, they really see the body as being a microcosm of the universe, and it's one of those things that is really separating this form of alchemy from the alchemy that we might more be used to, because it has to, and it pertains, it's not only internal alchemy because it has to do with the internal sense of self. It's internal alchemy because it's alchemy, and it's alchemy at the scale of the individual. The proving grounds and the alchemical processes and things like that all happen on the individual level, as opposed to the chemical level that we're used to dealing with in traditional alchemy. However, they mirror each other because truth is truth in so many ways. But it's important to understand that, and it's important to understand that to the Taoists, the lab is ever present. It's as close as our breath in how alchemy is expressed. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the problems that this maintains and the kind of loss of the system that can happen and how that's overcome, which is really the juxtaposition, the crux of the third statement there, that alchemy is important. And that has to do with the loss of the system. And in the West, we know exactly what caused the loss of the system, the repression of the system, the inquisitions that happened that started with the Cathars of this tradition and extended throughout, and even before that into the outline of the Nag Hammadi library and other things. There's been a systematic methodology of oppression up to and including burning and death and things like that, where these things have actively been suppressed. That wasn't the issue in China. That wasn't the issue in the Asian countries. And what led to the dilution of the systems and the kind of losing of the systems where it became important to recapture it had to do with philosophy and with people valuing their system in a one true wayism kind of way. So people go through and they learn about the Tao and they form the school of Taoism. And now we have this school of Taoism. We have the AJC, and it's important that we validate and continue to revalidate and push ourselves and make sure that everybody knows that the AJC is the grand Pumbaa out there, as an example. And this was no different in any other time of history where things were allowed to flourish. People it wasn't the best ideas that filtered to the top. It was the ones that honestly, it's not even the ones that were given the most veritas. It's the ones that were often the loudest and the most boisterous, or that had the biggest followings, or that people could feel the best about engaging in. Well, on both sides of this, where that took us is that there had to be some commonality whereby we could take the tradition and say, this is the core of the tradition. This is that aspect of the tradition or the philosophy that's immutable. And in the West, that came back to alchemy, that came back to the medieval alchemists that were there. And they practice very much, as I'd said, in labs and with experiments and in recreating natural phenomena through the Emerald formula and things like that, that led to a space where the tradition, the philosophy of the tradition, couldn't extend beyond the ability to prove it. That they're either, okay, well, that's a great and fantastic idea and you can spit that out, but does it actually work in the lab is a piece of that. And it happened in the same way in China, except it happened in the mountains there through the internal alchemy of the path towards immortality. And immortality is to be an immortal is really to achieve nirvana in essence. You've achieved a space where you can be transcendent, and you can this is a Gnostic rapture of sorts, where there's a rejoining of the pleroma. It's a Buddhist awakening kind of thing, but their term of that for that is immortal, and that it's their ascended masters. But where this really kind of started to come back to that, and where it started to really prove itself in China, was through the acupuncturists. And this is a plate of a wandering acupuncturist and a Chinese medical professional who would go out into the world. And again, the proof of that, the ability of the philosophy to exert itself in the world was kind of expressed through the ability to heal. And if people weren't healing, it was not something that would be considered philosophically sound. The philosophy, however elaborate or extraordinary or fascinating it may be, didn't really have roots in it unless it was able to be proven in the world of sorts. And that's actually something that happened here. And I want to point out here for a moment that we often think of Palprat, who's an extraordinary figure in our lineage there. You know, the sovereign pontiff of the Johannite Church, as we see here on the right, and the Grand Master of the Knights of the Temple here, as we see on the left. But we should also never forget that Palprat was also the personal physician of Napoleon. And when Palprat started to look for how it is that he could live these things and still practice medicine, what that traditional medicine was, he was also, in addition to all the great things that he did at our church, somewhat of a revivalist in the time that he was, that, medicine in that area of the world was still mainly leechcraft. I mean, they were bleeding people. They were, causing them to salivate out things like syphilis and stuff that we now know are just not only inhuman, but absolutely impossible to do anything with. And Palprat in this tradition also we're looking at this sense of alchemy to work with that. Now Palprat, he actually moved to acupuncture, the same as what I'm talking about today, and he was trying to practice that with electricity, much as we do today with TENS. And there is a tremendous body of work that shows that would have been eminently successful. And I think that probably one of the reasons why he didn't have so much success with it is because the electricity, as it were, at the time, we're dealing with vacuum tubes and not very much precision. And I don't think that it was really possible for him to get the kind of granularity that he would have needed to replicate results in what it was that he was doing. still the attempt in that was a humanitarian effort to not only prove the tradition and the teachings that were being inculcated, but also to bring back something of rationalism to a medical society that many felt was absolutely out of hand. And looking back into antiquity, I think that we could agree is the case there. And him along with another figure, an alchemist out of Transylvania, formed a great amount of that tradition there. So this is another one of those areas where the tradition itself finds itself into a different kind of theology that happens through alchemy, both in the East and the West, and in our tradition as well as in the Eastern tradition, that provides itself as an occasional proving ground in order to sort its way through a process of sorts. And what at this point I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of go back to something that we should all be relatively familiar with and start to walk through some aspects of Gnostic cosmology, because they actually matriculate down in much the same way. And with that, we can start to look at the tree of life here as we have it. And you'll see that I'm going to continue to walk through this and highlight the sections of it that we're working with at any particular time. But I'm going to walk through this in the sense, and it's not that I've made up or contrived this, but it's also not an extremely common way of looking at the tree of life, that the seven lower Sephiroth are equated with the seven Hermetic principles, and that being kind of empowered by the upper three there. But of course, you would go from mentalism to correspondence to vibration to polarity to rhythm to cause and effect to gender through there. And the reason that I'm doing this again is to attempt to link ideas that are similar to things that we already know, to expand them out better than it would happen if we just engaged with the poetry itself. And I accept significantly that there are some pieces of this that I'm glazing over in doing that. So the lesson is not in the exact that these things are the same, but they're in the lesson that they're similar enough that we can start to draw analogies that would be otherwise complicated. So we'll start with Genesis as we do and talk about mentalism in the first part and say, and the earth was void and without form, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the breath of God moved over the face of the waters. And as we move into correspondence, God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that the light was good. And God divided the darkness from the light, and the light he called day, and the darkness he called night. And this was the morning and the evening of the second day, of the first day, rather. So God is dividing himself here, and we can think of that as a level of polarity, but it's not. It has to do with a self-replication that starts with this initial replication and starts to create this correspondence where everything in essence relates into itself. And we see that here and also the first division of the cell, which in traditional Chinese medicine, we would see that as creating the points for the 8 extraordinary meridians. Now, the 8 extraordinary meridians are ones that live outside of the meridian structure, deeper than the meridian structure, and they well up through points that are separated into the meridian structure. There are 8 of them in total, and what they do is that they carry the energetic lineage of everything, our energetic ancestry, if you will. So all of those hurts and problems and things like that that we may have had from the past, they all find and express themselves through the 8 extraordinary meridians. This starts that, and that replication starts here. That division that creates division starts in this moment. Day 2, we have vibration, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and divide the waters from the heavens. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters that were above the firmament. And it was so, and God called the firmament the heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. We're creating more of life is creating inside of this, and this creation, this continued octavization of separation, of moving out, of spiraling out, if you will, is becoming a vibration, and it becomes a very pattern vibration where 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, becomes 32, and so forth into creation. And we can also, oops, why is it doing that? So we can say here that also Tippereth in its sense of vibration holds the primordial yin and the primordial yang channels of the Du and the Zen meridians, that, you know, and this is where the actions of the 8 extraordinary meridians start to form an orientation inside of the individual. The memories of the past start to separate themselves. The individual is defined within this channel that we think of as the yang quao and the yin quao that exists there. So there's a separation that happens between not what is an individual separating itself, but what's starting to become yin and yang at this point in time. And in the Tao, we would say the Ain Saf area would be considered wuji, or boundless frontiers, where there is absolutely no boundaries. And as that separates down, its first iteration is taiji, or infinite potential. It's not even really yin and yang at that point in time. It's the absolute potential for everything that expresses itself in both yin and yang. And through that potential forming in vibration, we end up creating a vessel in which the world can form itself, and the vibration of what that is. Now we reach polarity, which is where we start to see an actual sense of delineation happen, that we can start to see as being something that we can consider to be yin and yang. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land the earth, and let gather the waters called sea. And God said that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grasses, and herb yielding seed, and fruit yielding tree after his kind, whose seed was itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth the grass and herb, and yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was after itself and his kind. And God said that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. So the vibration continues and creates and starts to create a continuum of polarity that acts upon lines of similarity. And this is one of those great lessons here that we need to learn about this, that if you want to control, it's not that it doesn't exist everywhere else, it's just that this is a very good place to talk about it. And that's that as you start to control things, like you're looking at a world of polarity, you have cold and you have hot, right? Everything that is on that continuum, and it acts upon that line of polarity. You can't have cold and hot and come up with flour out of that. It's on a different line of polarity. But inside of that line of polarity, if you want to change that polarity, what you have to do is you have to go up a level and into vibration. So you would take cold and you would increase the vibration, and it would create heat in that vibration, and it would move it closer to the other side. Well, this was well known to the Taoists, and they created this idea of yin yang, and it also it defines the laws that govern yin and yang and how to move and shift those polarities. So the opposition of yin and yang on a gradiated scale is the first law of that, just as we have here with hot and cold that we talk about in the Kybalion and others. The interdependence of yin and yang, that is that they cannot exist solo. You can't have hot and not cold. You can't have them without each other. The mutual consumption of that. And this is a hard one to define, but what they mean by this is that they always consume each other. So if I have yin and yang, and I move one of them up, one of them has to go down. We don't get situations where we move them both up or we move them both down very often. They are said to consume each other. So the balance that they create is one of mutual consumption, where yin will consume yang and yang will consume yin, and the vibrations shift in a very balanced way. So where we often look at it, as I was pointing out here, on a continuum of a line, they would see this on a continuum of a balance. They would see it on a set of balances where they consume each other and move up and down with each other, where they end up consuming the parts of the other piece there. In the intertransformation of yin and yang, that is, that they are not static, that they constantly change and become each other. And the way that that happens is through consciousness. And it's a particular kind of consciousness, and one that creates an imbalance. So in Taoism, these are the 8 that are created. These are the 8 patterns that are created from this balance of yin and yang, right? This shows the mutual consumption of it. But the thing about it is that if you created a section there whereby they were on a line, that line may not move. There's a place there where they find a continual balance and everything freezes in place. What ends up happening is that the third line, consciousness itself, acts almost like the pivot point on the balance, to where things are in constant flux, and anything that impacts it impacts both of them equally, and allows them to consume each other, not because it has a will as we consider will and consciousness, but the consciousness is passive in that it acts as a pivot for the rest of it. It's that third place that almost forces transformation to happen, because it keeps it a little bit out of balance all the time, if that makes sense. And we need to understand that concept of consciousness in this, because it's not the last time that we see it here. In day 4, I'm not going to continue to, we'll read this one here. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament in the heaven, and divide the day from the night, and let there be signs and seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven, to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of heaven, and gave light upon the earth to rule over the day and the night, and divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day. So now we have this idea of rhythm. We have this idea of rhythm that's coming into this. And this is where we start to move from simple polarity of Tai Chi, of the yin and yang, into an idea of elements. And at this level, you can't think of them as elements. I hate that we use that word there, and I hate that we link them to like earth, wood, water, fire, metal. None of those things are really accurate. What we have here is the cycle, kind of a sine wave, if you will, that shows this. And right here, what we have is wood, right? So wood is spring, and it's starting to grow, and it's becoming yang. And up here, where we just passed with summer solstice, is your fire, or full yin, or full yang rather. So yin becoming yang, yang. Then we have fall, which is yang becoming yin, and then we have winter, that is yin. And what you'll notice in here is that there's not really an earth inside of that. Where earth sits is actually here in late summer, and it does the same thing. When we look at the 5 elements in this, we see the same pattern, where wood is yang increasing in the spring, fire is yang at its apex in summer, metal is yin increasing in the fall, and water is yin at its apex in winter. So we see this happening around the cycle, but again, once it fixes and crystallizes, it exists as four there, but Earth actually forms the consciousness. It's that same line of consciousness, and it acts in the same way, where because it's there, its simple presence creates a new balance of motion that keeps it moving and moving and moving, and it helps to keep it from becoming stagnant just by its merit of being there. So we can say in Taoism that where there's two, there's three, and where there's four, there's five, because there has to be an element of consciousness within that. And it's that kind of thing that keeps the Tao moving, and it injects this idea of consciousness into Taoism that is not consciousness like we see consciousness in divinity here, like there's a will for the universe or something. It's a passive kind of consciousness that acts of its own volition and of its own nature, but the very center of it being there keeps it in motion and keeps it moving. So on the day 5, we have cause and effect, and we're bringing forth creatures of their own kind and being fruitful and multiplying. And the becoming has consequence, and the waves of reality are set into motion. These exist in the reality of our inner world. And they talk about the 10 earthly branches and the 12 heavenly stems. So you have 12 stems in heaven that are reaching down to earth, and you have 10 branches on earth that are reaching up to heaven, and through the center of that, all of creation is mixed. And these are things that we have to worry about considerably inside of Chinese medicine, actually. And that's one of the ways, as an acupuncturist, is one of the ways that I approach this. But at this point in time, what we have is a different view of the 5 elements, and one where they end up stagnating for a moment, right? We have the 4 elements that we're used to. We can look at this just as easily and say air, fire, water, and earth, right? We can look at these as being the 4 fixed elements on a cross, and now consciousness is in the center of them. And that this is something that happens between the 10 heavenly stems and the 12 earthly branches, and they give us 72 patterns, 72 yin patterns and 72 yang patterns, for a total of 144 patterns, which, if we look at that here, we can see that here where we have the 10 earthly branches interacting with the 12 heavenly stems, and depending on where they fall, and it's very metered, because the 12 celestial branches are going to be the zodiac. It gives us our 144 patterns, which is not too dissimilar from the 72 angels and 72 demons of the Shehemfarash that also come up to 144. These are living things that in particular in things like Korean Sam acupuncture and things like that, they actually have 144 prescriptions to meet those needs inside of the body, depending on where that cycle is exactly and what's influencing it. But it also gives us a situation where we can see that the fixed world expresses itself as a cross here with consciousness on the center, and the dynamic world of rhythm before reality has really taken hold of it. In that space of rhythm, consciousness expresses itself as another point, and in the pentagram there, which is an interesting thing. On the 6th day, we end up having gender, and gender is really that wave. It's that wave of consciousness that comes from I show it here as the Big Bang leading all the way up into now. So everything that has ever happened, everything that has ever created part of our ancestry is all coming up from this bottom area, creating exactly what we are. And it interacts with this matrix of creation to to develop this idea of what we are in the now. As the mind of God sinks into creation, it has the tendency to affix to things that create resistance around it. And in that sense, everything that we are, anything that I could define myself as, the circumference of the Masonic circumference, I should say, of who I am, is only a definition of the resistance that I have to divinity, and creating me out of that resistance. As that resistance fades away, what ends up happening is that it's not an existence, it's a fading back into the matrix. It's already there. Reality draws creation out of itself through its own resistance in that sense. One more thing that I should say about yin and yang is that these are not absolutes, but they're only ever in relationship to each other. And one of the ways that I can talk about that is boiling water, right? So I take a pan and I put it on a fire. Yang is hot and yin is cold. So I put a colder pan on a hotter fire, and my pan is yin in relationship to the fire that's yang. Well, now I pour water into the pan, and the pan is warmer than the water. So the pan itself is yang in relationship to the water that's yin. So at both of those sections, depending on where you look at it, the pan is either yin or yang, because it's all in relationship to each other. And that's an important note to make, because very often I'm said, well, what if you make the yin obvious? And it's like, well, all that you've done is change the perspective to where it's yang now. The yin has to act to its essential nature, and yang has to act to its essential nature. You can't define the two of them separate from each other. And once you've made that definition, one is always in one place and one is always in the other place. Though with the next comparison that you make, that can be scattywampus and shifted quite a bit. So when we look at this, there are three treasures that we deal with in terms of internal alchemy, and these are the Jing, the Shen, and the mind, or the Qi, and that these exist for us in this area. Now, this is a triplicate nature that exists inside of our bodies, and the Jing itself is kind of the primal motivating force, if you will, that comes to us through our kidneys. And the Shen itself is our awareness. It's what unfolds for us. If there's a bodily equivalent of the Holy Spirit, it would be the Shen that lives in the heart. So again, we start to see some sort of unfolding, or the sacred flame kind of equivalent that occurs itself in the heart there, that unleashes itself in terms of awareness, which is different than the mind, which is the Qi that picks up there. So we can even say we have consciousness, we have the Logos, and we have Sophia, if you will, in a way. We have the primal masculine force and the primal feminine force, the primal masculine force living in the kidneys, and the primal feminine force living in the heart, with the awareness living mindish. It's a different kind of thing than we would think of, like our mind and our thoughts. In that way, it's quite a bit different. It's like, I think the easiest way to describe it is like the third line there. It's the piece that allows everything else to work. It's the energy, the breath, the attitude, the subtleties that creates the consciousness that drives the others, even though it really only kind of expresses through the others, if that makes sense. You know, so the Jing and the Shen are the primary expressors, but the Qi itself is what vivifies any of that, much in the same way that we might consider the Logos and Sophias to be the primary expressors, but it's God the Father that matters in that equation, if you will. There was a question here. Yeah, Wujing, 5, it's a word that denotes to go, to move, among other things. And you're right, it does connote movement and stages. It shouldn't, it's problematic in our Western mind for us to consider it as being elements, because we think of elements as being fixed, and it's not that. It's one of those things that we translate poorly, I think, because you can't, and people will go through and try to make analogies and try to draw them between, well, this element does this and it interacts like this with this element, and it does. You can get about 2 steps down any of those things before it starts to fall apart, and you're left with this, well, this analogy just stops here. I can't take it any further. And the reason that the analogy stops there is because it shouldn't be a fixed thing. It should be a dynamic thing that happens there.
Quick question, if it's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Bishop Bray and I talk on a regular basis, and as he knows, I struggle with some of this stuff. So you had the division, so you had mind, body, and spirit. And so when we had Roshi Ford on yesterday, and of course he's coming at it from a Buddhist perspective and a Japanese perspective, but he mentioned in the context of the suttas or the sutras, whatever, that mind is more properly translated as mind heart or heart mind. Is that the case here?
Yeah, that's exactly the case here. And that's why I'm tripping so much over some of these delineations, where we look at chi. It's talking about chi as being mind here, but it's really not. The Shen and its sense of awareness is something that extends to thought and brain and things like that. The mind itself, we really should be translating as consciousness, in a way that there's some imbuing consciousness that attends to that and unifies and motivates those things. It's a direction of the Jing in the body and the Shen that is in the heart, but it is closer to that unfolding of revelation than I would really care to draw complete analogies to, because I think that most people would think that I was pushing on that. But it is that unfolding of the awareness that we have around it. And Shen is mind, and it's one of those things that the mind is in the heart at that point in time, which is different than directive cognition, if that makes sense. It is a very subtle difference, but one that we're able to reconcile in experience. But if you're practicing Wu Wei, the mind and the Jing and the Shen are operating, and they're floating on the balance of Qi. It's Qi that floats their wings, if that makes sense.
I think I'm following. I got a whole bunch of ideas, but I will save them for the question period.
No worries. So again, this is where we end up. This is another view of how these things kind of matriculate out, where we have Wuji here, this boundless frontier, really here, Taiji of potential, moving into yin and yang, moving into yin becoming yang and yang becoming yin and yin. And then they have moving out from the core, which gives us the 8. And this isn't a different kind of thing. We can find that we can also talk to like DNA this way too. And not only can we talk to DNA, this pattern of understanding is so true and so ubiquitous that not only can we talk to DNA, but we actually find that if we encode it the same way, the start and stop points of DNA actually become programmatic stop and start points that we can key off of as well. They have the same logical breakpoints in there. And this is, again, another picture there where you have the motivating force and the Shen, and they're held together in this container of primal yin and primal yang, where that comes out. This is a picture that I took from one of my acupuncture textbooks, and it's one that I really like. because if we lay out these, the Du Mai, the Yin Chao, the Yin Wei, the Dai Mai, the Ren Mai, the Chong Mai, the Yang Chao, and the Yang Wei, these are the 8 extraordinary meridians that express themselves through points. But if we lay them out in the order that they actually arrive in the in their natural pattern, and we align the organs with them, what we see is something that very much resembles, accidentally, not intentionally, that very much resembles the same 10 Sephiroth that we've been dealing with. And we can almost relate the 10 Sephiroth to the 10 internal organs as they exist within us, that are moving with this cyclical nature that we have here and starting to create. It also has 10 or sometimes 11 as you look at some points that move, or you see almost like the subtle energies between them, the pathways that go between them. When you lay them out like this, creates like a Star of David, or a kind of Merkaba that exists there in the upper jiao around the heart region, is where that would end up being in the body. So I did absolutely like that, where we see this happening, but what it's actually reflecting is, this is the lower realms that I was talking about, where the matrix of creation and the ancestry are coming in to create the 10. This is distributed down through the 12, and its gate points are the primal yin and primal yang and qi, the qi yin and the qi shen and jing rather. But it also makes me interested in pictures like this, where, to a Taoist, this would be something that made perfect sense. This would be the kidney jing down here. That's the primal motivating force. And you would have the heart shen right here that's distributing out to either the 10 organs with the two kind of imaginary organs in the pericardium and triple warmer, or the 12 zodiacs as being the influence there, and you would have the qi shining down on them. So a Taoist would look at a picture here of Pentecost and say, I know exactly what's happening there. The primal Shen is creating awareness through the primal motivating force, and qi is directing that to enliven, to create an instance through either the universe itself at one level or the organs themselves at another level. So this is also iconography that would intuitively make sense to a Taoist that was looking at that, though they might get caught up in the figures, but they would certainly understand. If you looked at that and said Jing, Shen, Qi, they would know exactly where they were at in that. So we have this idea that kind of matriculates down, and we've been linking it to the Sephiroth through the 7 Hermetic principles as we find them in the Kybalion. And like I said, that's a little bit contrived, but the idea of this is to create an alchemy moving up those levels. So one of the things that I'd like to talk about is what this first transition is here, where we move from gender into cause and effect. And I'd like to draw a parallel of that through the teachings that come to us. And I talk here about the Buddhist Eightfold Path as an example. Taoism doesn't really have this. They talk more about the nature of the universe and the nature of the Tao, and they expect you to get it through there, and they have the Nidan practices. So it's not something that you engage with philosophically as much as something that you engage with through the alchemy and economy of movement that's placed to us. So the efforts towards Gnosis, the path towards Gnosis, is one through that occurs through the perfection of movement and the moving towards this idea of wu-wei, or the perfection of doing nothing that we might talk through there, and in the Adam Nous that they might talk about as Shengren there. That even like even in Masonry, we have this goal of making good men better, and that leads us up through, the 32 paths, the 32 degrees, until we're dumped in this revelation of Gnosis that exists there. And then living in cause and effect has us in this space where something weird happens, that as we start to really engage with cause and effect, as we start to really engage with this world, we start to move ourselves into an idea of compassion as we move into the other one. And I talk into the next one, and I talk about the Buddhist views here, and how the Eightfold Path, which is kind of we have suffering exists, suffering is caused by, the way to end suffering is through cause and effect, and cause and effect can be managed through this Eightfold Path. So in its very nature, Buddha is giving us a prescription to move from the world of gender to the world of cause and effect, as is Jesus, as he's taking the Jewish foundations and moving us from a world of gender and into a world of cause and effect, where we have prescriptions whereby we can start to manage and monitor cause and effect. To move up any higher, though, we have to start to move up to where we engage with rhythm, and in an entirely different kind of aspect to that, where we need to look at the alchemy of what that is, and the alchemy of how that rhythm works. And we know, based on where those teachings go and how they express themselves, that one of the primary lessons of rhythm, and one of the very interesting ways of engaging that, one of the lessons there that we have to learn to prepare ourselves for that, is one of compassion, and that this is one of those paths there. And ironically, that's happening on our world right now too. We're moving from a sense of Newtonian cause and effect science to one of rhythm and probability. We're moving into this space where rhythm and probability are a lot more valuable to us than simple cause and effect there. So even on a sociological level and scientific level, we're trying to make this leap from cause and effect back to rhythm. And as we start to move from rhythm, we have to go into polarity and vibration, correspondence, mentalism. We have to work our way up those levels and everything. And this is one of those reasons, like those of you that understand the feminine liturgy that we put out, it's understanding that at this level, at the level of cause and effect, we have fixed crosses with consciousness either rising off or splattered on it. And at this level, consciousness is a part of it. Consciousness is a passive part of it. The same things are in the same places. We just have to look at it differently in order to engage with it as rhythm than we do to engage with it as something that's fixed and already happening. And we're looking at that as like a descent cycle that goes from here to here, but it's also an ascent practice that goes from here to here as well, inside of that system. And it's not really that much different than what it is that you're doing in the Taoist internal alchemy either, where you're just doing it through motion and things like that. But the like many of the Gnostic scriptures, the Taoist writings were written for the people that already knew. Once you know what a scripture means, once you've had an experience of it, you almost don't need it, because all that it does is reaffirm what you've already experienced. Until you've experienced it, it can take on all kinds of meanings and all kinds of things, like, well, I think it means this, and I think it means that, and I think it's this. But until you know, you don't really know. And once you know, you don't have to question it anymore. And the Taoist writings are written in much that same way, in a poetry that expresses itself through something that you would have to have already experienced in order to understand it. So this is one of those reasons why I chose to kind of tune this to the Western mind, is because it taps us into a common mythos and a common philosophy with which we can use to go through and explore this. It doesn't mean that it's that 100%. And there's a lot more and a lot more depth to this. I mean, clearly, nobody could take this and go, oh, I know exactly how to do acupuncture now, as an example. I know exactly how to do alchemy. But what I'm trying to do is to create an environment that gives a first step in terms of approaching it and understanding in a way that if there's curiosity, it can be explored with a little bit more depth and have a little bit more filter than what you're looking at in terms of the absolute groundedness and being of it in terms of working with the body that is not extraordinarily intuitive through the lenses of the poetry that you would be reading, if that makes sense. So, and generally it's not necessary. I mean, you go through and you look for a teacher that does this, and what you do is a lot of Tai Chi and things like that. It moves you into a space of physicality in a space that you don't always understand the movements that you're doing until you get further along and you understand, oh, I do that because it moves the majority of the spleen, and it helps move this energy through this rhythm, right? I do this because it calms my heart down, or I do this because it speeds my heart up. And some of that is as simple as breathing. The idea that you can slow your heart down or speed your heart up or move it by how you count your breaths. Are you exhaling more? Are you inhaling more? Things like that will have dramatic influences on this level of being. But it's not one that is easy to convey in a system, in a lecture like this, because we'll sit down and do this for a couple months and tell me what you think about it, kind of thing. Or read these texts that are fundamentally impenetrable until you've actually had the experience of what it is. So I hope that this has made some sense for people, and I hope that I haven't reached too far in terms of my efforts to create bridges and understanding of these things, but I hope that it's something that serves to help a little bit. And with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions, so I can answer things that come up here, and we can go from there.
Unless there's further slides, you might want to unshare. That way I can shift perspective between the speakers.
Absolutely.
Okie dokie. We got some comments coming. Well, it appears people are following along just fine. Let me turn my video on here. So I do appreciate the fact that, while I'm not a Kybalion fan, what I mean, it has helped to particularly that laid over with the tree with which I'm familiar, makes it easier for me to understand, because for this it's literally all Greek to me. So so I think, I don't think that's a reach, is basically what I'm saying. If it helps communicate the point, then it's worked just fine, right? So and for me, where I find this stuff, harder to grasp and digest, this has actually helped quite a bit.
Good.
So in terms of my own questions, and I guess this is a thing because I like to say that Gnosis is the subjective experience of objective spiritual truth. The reality is that everything, of course, is mediated through the human being. So with just like that, with this, I'm going to try and filter it or understand it in my own language. So I tend to, of course, anytime anytime I see a 3, a 5, a 7, a 10, or whatever, of course, I'm
Mhm.
associating it with all other 3, 5, 7s, and 10s that
Yeah.
I know, and it doesn't necessarily mean there's a connection there. So going back to the body, mind, and awareness thing, I'm thinking of, and this reference you'll get immediately. It might be more obscure for other folks, so I apologize, but I'm trying to understand it in my head.
Mhm.
Would those almost be kind of, I guess, correspondent to the kind of 3 worlds or 3 levels of the human being, for example, you have in the modern Martinist order?
They sure could. That's absolutely an expression of them. I tend to think of them more in the shamanic realms as being ancestry, divinity, and humanity that comes together. So the way that I generally think about it is that there's an ancestry that's coming up, and that's meeting a divinity that's coming down, and the reality is creating by the mixture of the two of them.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, but it doesn't preclude the Martinist ideas that are there either, because I think that most certainly they evolve in the same lines, but it is a little bit different kind of way of thinking about things. But there is a you, and that you is a lot bigger than you. That you, like the Norse say, know your own strength, for you were the power of 1,000 loves. There's a lot more to you than just you, and this acknowledges that there's a you that came into existence, and that you came into existence as a consciousness, but that consciousness wasn't enough alone. It had to have divinity move into it, and that divinity of sorts works on its own rhythms, universal rhythms. So they end up linking that, honestly, like the West does, to astrology and to the cycles and rhythms and motions of the universe around them. Not because that's truth, but because it's truth enough that the human mind can wrap its mind around the cycles of it.
So speaking of wrapping my head around
Yeah.
it, neophyte question here. The I like to think that I'm the stand-in for the average stupid guy, right? Like like you have, when you look at Sherlock Holmes, where you have Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. I mean, of course, Dr. Watson. You go back to the thing. Dr. Watson's actually a pretty smart guy, who's indispensable to Sherlock Holmes. But when you look at Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce, Nigel Bruce is kind of the comic relief stand-in for the audience, much in the same way that you look at the Gospels, and there's a lot of occasions where the apostles are just frankly idiots. So as I find myself identifying with the apostles and sometimes their idiot qualities, I'm going to ask really neophyte questions, because so one thing that I've always had a hard time wrapping my head around, of course, because I'm so rooted in the Western mystery tradition, Eliphas Levi kind of semi sort of, we pretend it's classical, might not be as old as everybody says, system of 4 elements, and then you've got spirit and blah, 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 blah. I've never been able to wrap my head around the elements, in terms of the Taoist or the Chinese system, where you've got wood and metal. Like, what happened to air? Right.
Well, and that's the problem, is that we can't look at them as elements. It all falls apart if you look at them as elements. Whenever I see the 5 elements, there are times that I have to treat it on a pentagram, but it's much easier for me to imagine it as a sine wave. And if I look at it as, yin becoming yang, yang becoming yin, and consciousness moving down the center, that makes a lot more sense. And I just call that wood, but I could call it Bob. It really doesn't matter. I'm just defining a stage on a sine wave, because it's not actually fixed at that level. An element, if you look at an element, if I pick up earth, if I pick up, air, or water or whatever it is. It's something that's tangible. Even air is somewhat tangible. I can feel it, especially if the wind blows. But these aren't that way. It's a cycle. It's just a cycle that happens. How do you pick up spring? How do you pick up summer? How do you pick up fall or winter? You know, it's something that happens. How do you pick up, you know, dawn, noon, dusk, midnight? You know, how do you pick those things up? And the 5 elements relate to each of those. So if you say, well, you know, twilight is like wood, well, it is in that system. It absolutely is in that system. And, you know, noon is like fire. We can go, oh, well, yeah, noon being like fire makes sense. You know, okay, well, you know, twilight is like metal. Wait, what? How? What? Who?
So is it? So it's like a I guess like
Yeah,
a spectrum rather than a binary switch like the
yeah,
age-old question, applicable in my case, but very much not
yeah,
in yours. How many hairs do I have to have to not be considered bald or to be considered bald, and where's the dividing line kind of thing, and
yeah.
that pinpointing that thing. A isn't going to happen and B isn't the point.
Right. Yeah, and that I would say that happens under yin and yang. That would be under the
Okay.
principle of yin and yang, where yin becoming yang, bald becoming hairy, you know, whatever. And I'm getting there, dude. I mean,
Well, you're a lot
I'm
better
just
off than
happy.
I am.
My little brother went bald before me, so I feel like I'm winning. But it's definitely getting there in my 50. You know, as I approach 50 closer here. But yeah, the thing about the elements, and you can't look at it that way in terms of them being something that's real. You have to look at it in terms of it being a sine wave. It's really one of those things that I think they did a terrible injustice in the translation of it, because it makes us think that they're a thing. And sometimes they even present it as a thing. But like I said, every single time anybody's argued with me that it's a thing, you go like 2 steps and it crushes, it falls apart. You know, it all falls apart, and it stops making sense. So people go, well, they don't make sense to me. And I'm like, yeah, me either. But the only way that it makes sense is if you look at it as a sine wave, as kind of an arc of becoming, where, you know, take the yin yang symbol, spin it, and you'll have the 5 elements.
I was doing good until you invoked math.
Yeah.
As always.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? We've got some comments coming in the chat. Any questions? Well, everybody's a lot smarter than I am. Well, that's okay. That means I'm in the right room. Thank you kindly. I really enjoyed that. This is something I was looking forward to this because Bray and I have, varied and meandering talks on spirituality and correspondences and differences. And historically, he can tell you that this is a topic that I've struggled with. And I think I've inched a little bit closer here for my own sake. So
it's one that's very deep, and I mean, we're scratching the surface on it here and everything, but I do love how the only reason why any of these things work is because of the octaves of emanation. You know, 1 becoming 2, becoming 4, becoming 6, and how it happens like that, where consciousness interjects itself, is ubiquitous enough between the systems that there's enough overlay that we can kind of force or contrive a link between them. But how that ends up separating itself all the way down to 72, 144, you know, and how special and important that number is to us. And if there is truth to that, we would have to look at things back and say, is there some sort of an amphibian DNA of sorts that would say that the Kabbalah doesn't really stand on its own, the Sephiroth doesn't really stand on its own. It really needs some of the elements of astrology to be put in there. that it needs the cycles of astrology to lead us into things like deeper understandings of the Shehempharath and things like that, you know, the angel and demon pairs that exist in that system and how they express themselves. That not that that's important to the 144 laws of the Templars or things like that, where we get all of those, you know, the 72 names of God, and you know, and how we dissect it down like that in terms of this tradition that even binds us to the laws that we have in Templarism. They're all an artifact of that. The question is, how do we get there? And in Taoism, they feed it down very logically from basically the Ein Sof all the way down into this is how it comes there. This is that dynamic, and not only that, you can point to it on your chart, you know, on your life, depending on where you were born, and say that's the influence that's happening right now for me. That's what that is. And even further down into, and this is the prescription that you would have for that. This is what you would do for that moment in time. And it exists in a way that, and it exists in a way in that tradition that doesn't exist in the Western tradition. And if they are true enough that they truly are coordinated, there's a lot more that we can learn about the tradition that we have in ourselves just by looking at how it is that unfolds.
I think that was something that I made reference to in the comments in a previous lecture, the idea of comparative stuff to create depth of field, to generate perspective. And perhaps that's why I'm such a fan of correspondences and comparative anything, because, you know, taking a single angle of kind of intellectual attack from my own perspective, you know, I usually get stopped short. So I have to sneak in the back door, as it were, in order to grasp it.
Oh, absolutely. And the only danger is that we run in that is maybe I'm overextending, maybe I'm looking too deep for connections that aren't actually there. So each part of it has to be true to itself. And I'm not really giving a lecture on Hermeticism or the Kybalion today. I'm giving a lecture on how the Tao descends, and it just happens to align enough with this that I can push it into that structure and create new linkages. Now, is the coincidence that it aligns coincidence, or is that important? Or these are things that we have to discover individually, I think. But it's tantalizingly close, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
Thank you kindly. I quite enjoyed that.
Not a problem.
We've got folks. We have our customary. Angie says you find medical astrology in the Renaissance system, and I was going. I could tack onto that. There are folks who have applied medical stuff to Eastern medical stuff to Western stuff in the form of stuff like Greenfield's Memphis Mizraim and whatnot. As for Angie making reference to medical astrology, I don't understand astrology as is, so it's not going to improve when you add the word medicine to it.
But if you take that that Renaissance medical astrology and you relate it back to the spinal nerves and herbology affinities to those spinal nerves, you get closer and closer to Paracelsus's system and how he worked with things, which is kind of a fascinating way that he did things. And it's one that the group that Palprat's that Palprat was a part of in those medical worlds we're looking at as well. There's a piece of that they were looking at as Paracelsus being in almost a separate line from the Aristotelian ideas of humors and things like that led us to, you know, the bleeding people, causing them to salivate, you know, those things that just killed so many people for so many years. It's like, oh, that seems like a good idea. We'll just hang on to that for, you know, 1800 years. it seems like it'll work. But the Palprat and that whole system there was trying to look for other things, and they certainly looked in that direction there for that. You know, trying to bring humanity, rationalism, and alchemy into medicine as opposed to humors. Of course, it ended up not ultimately going very far because germ theory would come out in another about 80 years or so, and as germ theory came out, that became dominant in the Western world, and it changed the entire way that we do things. But they were still making a huge attempt at the time there to work with some of these things.
I was going to say, there's also only so many times you can electrocute somebody before they pull your card. You made reference earlier to the fact that he experimented with electricity, or I think they called it in his day galvanism.
Yeah.
And your crack about a lack of precision made me shudder, because I'll tell you, you know, I've as a guy who has a bum left shoulder and has used a TENS machine, but who also has a familial tremor, which means my hands and my fingers twitch a little bit. I've accidentally put it on too high of a setting before, and I can only imagine and that's a pretty gentle, if imprecise thing. I can only imagine the poor folks around 1804.
Yeah, in the sense that they had was that that it was the pure distillation of ether. It was the primal motivating force of ether itself in alchemy. But yeah, where you're at with that, I mean, a vacuum tube, and especially vacuum tubes at that point in time, imagine that TENS machine was plus or minus 10 volts, you know. I mean, instead of plus or minus 0.003 volts.
Good times.
It makes a big difference.
I'd say.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And I think that it created a lot of problems for Palprat. Well, he had a really good idea. I don't think that it was time for it to enter the universe for us.
Well, it's kind of like cybernetics. I'll hop on, in the 5th generation technology rather than the 1st, which is likely to, boil my cybernetic eye out of my socket, or the 2nd generation, which is pre-populated with ads that you have to pay to remove.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that, thank you very kindly. That was excellent, educational and entertaining. We're going to break for an hour-ish, roughly, to 7 p.m. Mountain Time, where we will be returning for Joanne's talk for the Divine Feminine in Sethian Gnosticism. As I said to Dr. McGrath, the high weirdness will continue.
Yay.
So I will enjoy a dinner break and maybe a nap for folks who need it, and we'll see everybody back here in roughly an hour's time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.